But to come back to, if you like, guiding principles, one of the things that's been said a lot in Australia at the moment is that, red and blue are now irrelevant. We have to get through this together, and I understand that that's important. But we have nominally, you have a nominally conservative government. America does, I suppose you could say as well. Australia does, and yet they are now overseeing these command economies. Massive government intervention in our lives. Winding that back seems to me not only to be very important, it's going to be very difficult, but it needs to be subject to some principles. It seems to me that the great strands of Western thinking have largely hollowed out, and that's left us with ad hocery and with a great deal of managerialism. That isn't going to be enough. We'll have to have people who can articulate a vision of what sort of countries people we want to live in and how the global order might work. Any thoughts on the sorts of principles that should undergird thinking as we go forward? It seems to me that principles matter, is what I'm saying. We can't just think we're going to manage our way out of this. We've got to know what it is we want to get to.
The one thing that I concluded after living abroad for several years and then traveling to what I'd last counted up as 57 countries, some of which no longer exist, was that the absolute basis of civilization is the rule of law combined with liberty. These are actually the principles of government which I fundamentally subscribe to: law and liberty, and the rest of it is superstructure in my view. And the problem with both of these things is that they don't exist, they don't grow naturally. They grow only under certain types of cultivation, under particularly good conditions. And I think these conditions are rapidly ceasing to exist. And one of the things which allowed the particular form of law and liberty which your country and mine have until recently enjoyed was the long period of island government. In the British Isles, particularly in England, which allowed for a development of institutions and of habits and of a respect for law, which, if you look at areas of the world such as the Balkans, which are in many ways culturally and in many other important ways areas of great human development, they've never been able to develop these marvelous institutions and habits which we have because of the constant interruption of war and invasion which they suffer. And now we have a different form of invasion in the form of globalist economic pressure, which makes it harder and harder for us to assert these basic principles. And I fear for it. I think that whenever I examine any policy in its outcome, I start from the point of, well, how will this affect the fundamental principles of the rule of law and of human liberty, which seem to me to be the basis of civilized society? And almost invariably, the answer is badly. And I think this is another example of it. And part of the reason for that is, of course, that liberty only really exists if it exists in the hearts of free people. If they themselves aren't willing to defend it when it's attacked, then it can't long survive. And if you have a people which actually believes that it becomes so frightened that I think this alleged pandemic, and I say alleged because I think that we may possibly have overestimated its force, has created an atmosphere of fear in which people repose all their hopes in the state and in power. And of course, when you do that, power no longer really needs to worry about law, does it? It no longer really needs to worry about the consent of the people, because power becomes a straightforward, crude Hobbesian bargain. We protect you from the terror without, and you give all your freedom to us. And this is what's really frightening me. I'm scared of the economic consequences of this. I'm scared of the social consequences of it, but really, really beyond that, I think the education that I've had in the past few weeks of trying to stand for free debate and discussion has given me a really, really quite worrying lesson in how much less freedom I and anybody else had than they had, say, 10 years ago in this country and in any Western country governed by the rule of law. I have it. I have it partly because I've exercised it, and because other great great elements of providence, which I won't go into here, which have allowed me to exercise it. But the truth is that it's much more circumscribed than I've ever known it in my life.
That's a very profound thing to say. One of the American founding fathers, I can't remember which one, commented that anyone who allowed fear to, if you like, compromise their freedoms was worthy of neither.
I think it's Benjamin Franklin on that occasion. The man who sacrificed freedom for temporary security deserved neither.
Yeah.
I think it's Benjamin Franklin.
So the sort of Western ideal of freedom seems to have given way to the idea of rights, that, discrimination law machinery everywhere sets up a system of competing rights. So instead of celebrating freedom, practicing freedom, wanting to advance it to those who might not be fully enjoying it, that was what Martin Luther King, I suppose, was trying to do. Saying there's some people here who are not fully enjoying the freedoms that they ought to be entitled to as Americans.
Well, I try not to use the term rights. Rights seem to me to be granted by government.
Yeah.
And therefore, the whole theory of rights seems to me to be based on the idea that we do not have any of these things unless government grants them. Whereas the English principle, as I understood it, was always that man was free unless he was circumscribed by laws which had themselves been made by a free parliament. And that the idea that government granted certain rights, at the moment, the government grants me under certain conditions the limited freedom to leave my home. I am allowed to do so, but only if I have reasonable excuse to leave my home. And that's where I am in England, where I think the jurists of the 17th and 18th centuries would grind their teeth if they saw this going on. But that is my current legal position. Fortunately, where I live, it's not too officiously enforced, but there are other places where it is, and where police forces actively encourage people to inform on their neighbours if they go out too much. This has actually happened. I imagine it, but it is so. And freedom cannot be expressed or rationed in rights, in my view. Freedom exists, and you grant government certain powers to limit it by law. You hope, of course, in a properly constituted society, that most human behaviour should be governed first of all by conscience, so the law should only intervene as a last resort. And so a whole lexicon of rights seems to me, and its acceptance by so many people seems to me to be a mistake. It's unfortunate that the great documents of modern Western freedom, the Bill of Rights of the United States and the 100 years earlier of England, are called Bills of Rights rather than Bills of Freedoms, because that's what they actually are. What you no doubt, I'm sure the Bill of Rights is part of Australian law as is part of English law. What it actually says is, this is what the government cannot do.
No, we don't have a Bill of Rights.
This is what the people can't do. This is what the government cannot do. And those are the only things worth having. We have a government
constitution that serves very well, but no Bill of Rights. It's been contentious. There are those who want them, but we don't have one. So we really do adhere to the model, at least in theory, that unless it's prescribed, you are free to do it. But what has happened in this country is that we've now had over 50 years of more and more and more anti-discrimination legislation set up supposedly to secure people's rights, but then they end up being clashing rights. And that machinery has done nothing to stop, and indeed may even have aided and abetted a process of unquestioned winding down of social capital, of increased loneliness, of tribalisation, of anxiety, depression, self-harm. It's not been a happy story. We'd be better off pursuing freedom, I would have thought. But
and yet it was done in many cases. Yet it was done in many cases with the best of intentions, and people who did it didn't set out to achieve this end. And that's been one of the difficulties in arguing against it. And I think some of the initial, for instance, the early Race Relations Acts in Britain, I find it impossible, although there seems to me to be a sort of breach of principle involved in them. I find it impossible to oppose them because of the horrible things which were being done before they existed, which they prevented. The difficulty is, can you limit that sort of legislation, or does it go too far? And that ultimately is a problem for the individual humans involved in governing the country. I think we have, in many cases, gone too far in these ways. But I do like very much to start on the assumption that my opponents have good intentions. And I ask the same in return. And the interesting thing is, I don't get it. I'm assumed to be acting out of some sort of malice or mischief rather than out of good intentions. And that's another part of the gradual darkening of freedom in my country at the moment.
Thank you for watching this episode. We appreciate your support. If you value vital conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel there and also click the notification bell to stay up to date with new releases.